Freedom arrived wrapped in politeness and carried by a voice that treated captivity like a scheduling inconvenience. The chamber adjusted its gravity when she entered, not out of respect, but habit, the way systems leaned toward authority without being told. He noticed these things because there was little else to do while waiting to learn which version of his life would be processed next. "You are valued," she said, which was never a comforting sentence anywhere in the universe. "And therefore, tradable?" He almost laughed. Almost. The restraint deserved a medal. She continued without pausing, because pauses invited negotiation, and this was not meant to feel negotiable. His confinement had been immaculate. Clean food, reasonable hours, no chains unless required for transport. A civilization proud of its ethics always advertised them loudly. Freedom, she explained, was available, not granted. Available. The word hung there like a price tag. All he had to do was agree to a union. He asked the obvious question about why him. She answered with numbers, lineage, compatibility ranges, neurological variants. Somewhere in the explanation, grief appeared as a measurable unit, which struck him as ambitious. Her widowed daughter required stabilization. Marriage served that function. He served the remaining variables. Very efficient. "I don't suppose there's a trial version," he said. 30 days? Cancel any time?" She blinked slowly, eyes catching the light in a way human eyes never did. "Commitment reduces instability," she replied. "Reversibility increases sorrow." That was new. Philosophical software update? Maybe. He was allowed to meet the daughter after agreeing to consider the offer, which felt like agreeing to consider gravity. She did not look like a monster. That was almost disappointing. She looked like someone who had learned to sit very still while expectations were placed on her shoulders. Her hair shifted tone subtly as she spoke, reacting before she did. She apologized for the situation. He apologized back. They both laughed. Surprise, as if humor had slipped past customs control. "This isn't how I thought my life would recalibrate," he said. "Mine either," she replied, "but the system assures us it is optimal." He glanced at the ever-present monitoring lights. "The system doesn't seem great at romance." "It calls romance an inefficient emotional overlap," she said, dry as vacuum. "I suspect it has never been in love." That did it. He laughed properly this time, and something in the room recalculated. For the first time since captivity, the future stopped feeling like a corridor and started feeling like a question. Not a fair one, but a real one. Freedom, he realized, was on the table. So was someone else's life. And for reasons no algorithm could explain, he couldn't tell which weighed more. The contract room smelled faintly of ozone and regret, which he suspected was intentional. Across the table, a translation lattice hummed softly, adjusting meanings in real time to prevent emotional ambiguity. It failed immediately. The alien officiator smiled with professional warmth and slid the agreement forward as if offering dessert. "This union," the officiator said, will optimize grief dispersion, stabilize inheritance vectors, and reduce long-term civic drag. He stared at the document. Does it come with a return policy? The lattice hesitated. Humor detected. Recalibrating. The widowed woman sat beside him, posture perfect. Hands folded as if trained by centuries of expectation. Her hair shimmered subtly, reacting to stress before she admitted it existed. She leaned closer. You can say no, she murmured. The system prefers yes, but it tolerates no. Briefly. That was comforting. In the way a warning label is comforting. They were escorted to a compatibility chamber designed to translate emotional states into negotiable data. The floor warmed to match their combined body temperatures, then cooled when the chamber realized it had miscalculated intimacy. A voice announced that empathy syncing would begin shortly and requested honesty for optimal results. I should warn you, he said. I'm terrible at tests. She nodded. I'm terrible at choices. The sync began. Images flickered, her memories organized into elegant grief graphs, his life reduced to spikes of chaos and questionable decisions. The system flagged multiple inconsistencies. It asked him why he laughed during moments of fear. He answered honestly, because fear hated being laughed at. The system logged this as an error. A civic observer interrupted to note their emotional output exceeded acceptable unpredictability thresholds. The widowed woman glanced at him, eyes reflecting data streams, like stars. We're malfunctioning, she said, almost fondly. Story of my life, he replied. The chamber recalculated again, then again, clearly annoyed. It suggested they reduce spontaneous dialogue. They did not. Instead, they talked about small things, food synthesizers that tasted like apology, gravity fields with opinions, the odd relief of having expectations spelled out instead of guessed. When the session ended, the system declared the match viable with reservations. A rare designation. The officiator looked confused, which felt like a small victory. Outside, the widowed woman exhaled slowly. You made it worse, she said. I make most things worse, he agreed. But sometimes worse is just different, refusing to apologize. She laughed, sharp and real. The sound startled nearby sensors. In that moment, the contract felt less like a cage and more like a badly written invitation. And for the first time since freedom had been offered as currency, he wondered if choice, messy, inefficient choice, might be the most alien thing either of them could bring into the system. The city responded to their pending union the way it responded to weather anomalies, with quiet concern and several unnecessary meetings. Everywhere he went, systems adjusted a fraction too late, as if recalculating his importance and resenting the effort. Doors lingered open. Identification fields asked follow-up questions. A welcome message congratulated him on his emerging relational relevance, which felt like an insult wearing a smile. The widowed woman walked beside him through the civic corridors, her presence registering automatically as priority access. His did not. The difference amused him more than it should have. You're trending, she said, glancing at a public interface that pretended not to be monitoring them. The probability models, are arguing. About us? About you, she corrected. I am predictable. You are not. He took that as a compliment. The last time anyone had called him predictable, it had been followed by a breakup and a small fire. They were summoned to a pre-bonding orientation, which sounded educational but felt judicial. A facilitator explained that marriage here was not symbolic but functional, a living protocol that redistributed emotional load. Grief, once isolated, was now shared infrastructure. The facilitator asked if either of them had objections. He raised a hand. Just one. What happens if we don't do what the model expects? The facilitator paused. The model updates. That sounds ominous. It is adaptive, she replied, which was worse. Later, alone in a transit capsule, the widowed woman surprised him by leaning back and laughing quietly. You unsettle them, she said. They prefer loss. Loss is tidy. Choice is not. He studied her reflection in the capsule wall, how her hair dimmed when she was tired, how it brightened when she spoke freely. Do you want this? He asked. She considered the question longer than any system would have allowed. I want to stop being stabilized, she said. I want to be uneven. That made sense to him in a way contracts never had. The capsule jolted as a routing error forced a manual override. A recorded voice apologized for the inconvenience and blamed an emergent emotional variable. He grinned. That's me. She shook her head. No, she said. That's us. By the time they arrived, the city had already begun rewriting minor regulations, adjusting to the inconvenience of two people refusing to behave as data points. It wasn't rebellion. It wasn't romance either. It was something smaller and more dangerous, mutual refusal. For the first time since his captivity, freedom didn't feel like an exit. It felt like a direction, uncertain, inefficient, and shared. And somehow, against all civic projections, that felt survivable. The final authorization arrived as a conditional release, which felt appropriate. Freedom, it turned out, was still allergic to absolutes. He stood in the bonding hall while systems aligned themselves for a ceremony that was technically optional and practically inevitable. The city liked endings. Endings were tidy. People were not. The widowed woman stood beside him, posture relaxed in a way that would have alarmed earlier versions of herself. Her hair shimmered, then settled, as if it had finally agreed with her. Around them, facilitators waited for confirmation pulses, permission flags, consent indicators layered so thick they nearly suffocated the concept they were meant to protect. He glanced at her. Last chance to run, he said. I hear the transit system is very forgiving of panic. She smiled. I've run my entire life without moving. I think I'll stay. That was when he realized the bargain had already failed. Not because it was unjust, but because it no longer applied. The system requested final affirmation. He spoke first, surprising even himself. I'm not here to be traded, he said, and neither is she. The chamber froze. Somewhere, a model collapsed quietly. The city responded with its greatest weapon, reevaluation. It examined outcomes, recalculated risk, and discovered something profoundly inconvenient. Removing him now would destabilize her. Forcing the bond without consent would destabilize both. Letting them choose, however inefficient, offered continuity. Not optimal. Acceptable. The confirmation lights shifted. The contract rewrote itself in real time, clauses dissolving, permissions redistributing. The union remained, but no longer as obligation, as option. "Well," he said, watching the system struggle to keep up, "that's new." She laughed, openly, uncontained. The sound echoed, triggering a minor alert that no one bothered to silence. When they left the hall, there were no escorts, just corridors, familiar and different. He was no longer a captive. She was no longer a stabilizing asset. Together, they were an unresolved variable, which felt like progress. Later, in a quiet transit ring, she asked, "Do you regret it?" He thought about the cell, the offer, the weight of someone else's grief turned into policy. "I regret thinking freedom was something you took alone." She considered that, then leaned against him, just slightly. Enough to matter. The city continued around them, adapting as cities always did, rewriting rules to survive the presence of people who refused to fit cleanly inside them. He had entered this place, willing to trade his future for release. He was leaving it, having learned something far stranger. Freedom wasn't the absence of bonds. It was the right to choose them. And for the first time, the choice felt like his.